This is another session of the subject of airport engineering. We are continuing with the chapter of ATC and visual aids. This will be the last session of this chapter. In the last session, we have discussed about the various markings. The last topic was regarding the runway markings. So from this session, we will be continuing with the topics after the runway markings. So let us begin this session with the new topic. So the first topic in the today's session is the taxiway markings. So there are various types of taxiway markings. First is the center line marking, which was also in the case of the runway marking. Edge marking, particularly indicating the boundaries of the taxiways. Holding position marking on the taxiway, and the shoulder marking. So let's see one by one these various taxiway markings. So first of all, beginning with the taxiway center line marking. This is the center line marking, as we can see. So marked with the single strip, that is the continuous line, 15 centimeter width and continuous. So the width of this line is 15 centimeter, and unlike the runway center line marking, which was under the dash marking, this is a continuous line and the color is yellow, while in the runway markings all the markings were of white color. Terminates at the runway edge, that is it is up to the runway edge. The extent or the limit of this marking is up to the runway edge. Holding point marker painted. Holding point, now it comes in the segment of the holding apron. So basically holding point marker is that limit up to which we can hold or we can keep the aircraft at stay. So that holding point marker is also painted here. So as we can see that the taxiway markings are with the yellow color code. The taxiway edge marking, it is basically indicates that portion which is usable for the movement of the aircraft. Pavement edge marking, that is the end point of the pavement, and the yellow strips which are basically indicating that portion which is between the pavement edge and the taxiway edge marking. So that is sort of a safety area which will come into picture when the alignment of the aircraft is not as per what it should be. That is, if the alignment is sort of obstructed, or it is basically indicating that portion which will come into usage in some special case only. Again, this is the view for the taxiway marking at the end of the runway. So this is the end portion of the runway, this is the threshold marking, and this is the connection that is between the runway and the taxiway. So if we talk about the markings, first of all, this is the label which is indicating the taxiway, which is connecting the end portion of the runway. Holding line marking, now this indicates that limit up to which the aircraft can be kept at a stay. That is where all the calibrations and all the standards will be checked. That is the area or the portion of the holding apron. So we can keep an aircraft at a hold up to this limit. Next is the center line of the taxiway, which terminates here at the end of the runway. So this is the center line of the taxiway. Next, these are the runway threshold markings which we have already seen. This is the runway designation marking which we have seen in the last session, that is where the azimuth is from 75 degree to 84 degree. This will be the designation. This is the runway center line marking. Again, the runway labeling has been shown, threshold marking has been shown. Now these are the distances which have been labeled. So 39 meter is the distance for the threshold marking, that is end points of the threshold marking. 6 meter is the distance between, that is the offset given from the threshold marking to the pavement edge, that is the end point, and from where the threshold markings have begun. The length of the threshold marking is 45 meter. Then the gap between the runway designation marking and the threshold marking is 12 meter. The length of the runway designation marking is 18 meter. And lastly, the distance between the holding line marking and the runway is 30 meter minimum. So it can be more than this, but minimum 30 meter has to be kept. Again, this is the view for the taxiway marking at the entrance to the runway. So here the runway has been shown 30 meter, that is the minimum distance of the holding line marking, which we have seen in the previous image. The distance can be more than this, but not less than this. Taxiway has been shown. The center line of the taxiway, that is the continuous line, has been shown. Another thing which is new here is this overlapping distance, that is connecting the center line of the taxiway, and it is overlapping with the center line of the runway. So this sort of overlapping distance is a 60 meter minimum. So that distance sort of gives a connection between the center line of runway and the center line of taxiway. And the spacing between that connection, that is center line of taxiway, which is terminating with the center line of runway, is kept as 0.9 meter, that is in the transverse direction. Next are the apron markings. So it provides guidelines to the pilot in maneuvering the aircraft on the apron. So they come into picture whenever the aircraft is carrying out the movement on the apron. Apron, we already are aware about, is the terminal area where the parking of the aircraft is done, or where the loading unloading operation of the passenger or cargo is done, and where the fueling operation is done. So the color is yellow, as we can see in the image, and basically it indicates the path of the nose gear. Nose gear, we know, is in the front portion of the aircraft, that is near to the nose, that is the front portion of the aircraft, and it has a single wheel. So the path indicates that path which the nose gear has to specifically follow to maintain the alignment. Next are the shoulder markings. So first of all, talking about the runway shoulder markings, and then we will talk about the taxiway shoulder markings. So if we talk about this image here, as we can see that the markings are at 45 degree. So this is sort of indicating the edge of the runway, and as we can see that the markings are at the 45 degree angle. So these are the shoulder markings. These are the side strips. Basically this portion indicates that area where the movement of the aircraft should ideally be. This is the center line marking. But both the edges, the side strips have been shown, shoulder markings, and this is the midpoint of the runway for sort of creating the angle, that is the 45 degree angle from the midpoint of the runway. The markings are done. And lastly, these are the runway sides, that is the end points of the runway, or we can say the edge of the pavement. So yellow color marking, as we can see, the width of this strip is 1 meter, that is 1 meter wide strips, and at an angle of 45 degree. Next are the taxiway shoulder markings. So yellow color, as we have known that the color code in the runway markings is white, and for the taxiway it is yellow, and again they are of 1 meter width, that is the strips are of 1 meter width and perpendicular to the center line. So as we can see that the shoulder markings are perpendicular to the center line of the taxiway. So this is the taxiway center line, continuous yellow line, pavement edge for the runway, taxiway edge marking, that is indicates the area where ideally the movement of aircraft should take place, and the yellow shoulder markings which are perpendicular to the center line. Here in this image, both the runway and shoulder markings are shown together. So the runway shoulder, that is the 45 degree markings of yellow color. Runway, this is the runway pavement, the center line marking. Blast pad, we have already studied, that is a preventive measure, and one which will sort of handle the hot exhaust gas from the aircraft. So again here same, the markings are at 45 degree, that is continuous in the runway. Then these are the taxiway markings which are perpendicular to the center line markings. So this is the holding apron, that is the area or space where we can keep the aircraft at a halt. So again here the width, or the we can say clearance between the shoulder markings for the runway is shown as 30 meter, and same gap is kept for the taxiway marking as well. But wherever there is a curvature, this gap is reduced to half, that is 15 meter. So holding apron, then the spacings have been shown of 30 meter on curvature of 15 meter. This portion is the taxiway, and the shoulder markings have been shown, and by moving through the holding apron, the aircraft will move on the runway. Last in the other markings are the chevrons. So it is to identify the pavement area unusable for landing, takeoff or taxiing. So this is the portion which is the pavement area which is not supposed to be used for landing or takeoff operation. So that is the chevron markings, yellow in color, and as we can see that they are at 45 degree. So these are the yellow colored markings at an angle indicating the unusable area, and all this rest of the markings we have seen in the runway marking portion. Next topic is the airport lighting. So basically in night time there is reduction in the visibility. The information has to be conveyed by the lighting arrangement during the night time, and the lighting patterns are standardized so that whenever the pilot is carrying out the operation at any airport, he is basically aware as to the meaning of those patterns, and also specific color codes are given so as to get an idea regarding which that specific element is. The airport lighting guides the pilot regarding various below mentioned parameters, that is the altitude or the elevation, the alignment and the height. So basically these are the various parameters, information of which through the patterns, through the color codes are given to the pilot. The airport lighting basically includes all these lighting facilities, that is the airport beacon, identification beacon, approach lighting, threshold lighting, runway and taxiway lighting, apron and hangar lighting, and the stopway lighting. So we will be seeing one by one all these various lighting systems which are adopted at the airport. First of all is the airport beacon. So first is the airport beacon. It indicates that field is equipped for night operation. So this beacon, basically the purpose is a sort of an indication that at this specific airport the operations can be carried out during the night time. Placed at 6 meter above any adjacent building. So in the vicinity on any building, it is kept at a height of 6 meter. Beam of light is projected in two directions, that is at 180 degree. So here at 180 degree, the beam of light is projected in both the directions, one of white color and another of green color. So that is, one is clear light and another is the green light. Next is the identification beacon, which is used at an airport where it is intended for functioning during the night time only. So basically which is the specifically function are done during the night time only, that is an indication given by the identification beacon. Located high enough on airport so that beam clears all obstruction. So the height should be selected in such a manner that whenever the beam or the ray is emitted, then it is clear of all the obstructions surrounding it. Continuously flashing green color light. Next are the approach lighting. At time of landing during night, only elements which give guidance to the pilot. Pilot takes decision regarding landing at height of 60 meter above runway. Now approach, as the word has been used, so basically it is sort of giving an indication that we are about to approach, we are about to meet the runway. So basically at the height of 60 meter, the pilot takes the decision as to the landing operation has to be done on the runway or not. And during the night time, this is the only element which will give a guidance that now we are approaching the runway and we are near to the runway, so we should be ready for the landing operation. So basically these are the approach lights which will be sort of taking us towards the runway. Next are the threshold lighting. Threshold we are already aware about, indicates that portion after which we can carry out the landing or takeoff operation on the runway pavement. Identification of runway threshold is important for the pilot's decision making, because from that he will get an idea that on which portion of the pavement am I supposed to touch down at the time of landing operation. Terminating bar of red lights placed 60 meter ahead of runway threshold indicate the end of the approach lighting. So these red lights, which are terminating bar which are placed at 60 meter ahead of the runway, indicate the end of the approach lighting and the beginning of the threshold lighting. So this is that distance. So if we talk about the labels here, approach lighting, these are the red lights which are sort of giving us an idea that we are approaching the runway. Threshold lighting, that is this green color bar of lights. Runway center line marking, this is the center line marking. Runway end light, that is at the end portion on the another side. On both the sides of the runway center line lights are the touchdown zone lights, that is where we are supposed to touch the pavement. The aircraft is supposed to touch the pavement at the time of landing operation. So these are the touchdown zone lights for an indication to the pilot. And lastly, these are the taxiway lights of the blue color code. Next are the runway lighting, placed along the full length of the runway in two parallel straight lines equidistant from the center line. So they are placed equidistant from the center line on the full runway. Now there is a term called black hole effect. Now previously what used to happen was that the lighting facility was only provided along the edges, and there was no any lighting facility on the runway pavement itself. So what used to happen was that at the time of landing, the pilot, when he is approaching the runway, at first he will get an idea of the end points of the runway from the lightings which are placed at the ends. But whenever the altitude is reducing, that is whenever the situation where he is approaching the runway, that is when he is about to touch on the runway, there is a duration where there is complete blindness or complete darkness in view of the pilot. The reason being that there is no any lighting arrangement on the runway pavement. Repeating again, in the previous cases only on the edges lighting system was provided, and whenever the pilot is about to touch the runway, there is a sort of duration where in his cone of vision there is due to non-availability of lightings on the runway itself, there is a duration where there is complete darkness, and that was creating a problem at the time of landing operation. And so that effect was termed as black hole effect, that is due to absence of lighting system on the pavement. There was a duration where in the cone of vision there was complete darkness for the pilot. So to counteract that problem, the lights were then began to be provided on the runway pavement itself, which is the narrow gauge pattern, which we will be seeing in the upcoming slide. So to eliminate this problem, the narrow gauge pattern was adopted, that is the lighting pattern. All lights on the runway edges are elevated type, that is on the edge they are elevated from the pavement, and inside the runway are flush type, that is having the same level as the runway itself. So this is the view for the narrow gauge pattern. Threshold lighting, that is the green lightings which you have already seen. Approach light for a length of 900 meter, that are the red lights which we have seen from the which will terminate at the threshold. Now these are the narrow gauge lighting which have been shown here, that is 3 bars of lighting system. So this is the narrow gauge lighting system, the flush grid white lights. So they will be emitting white light, and flush grid means basically the level is same as that of pavement. The elevated runway edge lights, again they are they will be emitting white light, and they are elevated type which are on the side of the pavement, they are not on the pavement. So here the 18 groups of white light at 60 meter center to center. So the meaning of this label is that, as we can see, that the gap or the clearance between these patterns is 60 meter, and 18 groups have been shown because the total length, if here it has been shown as 1080 meter, and the clearance or the gap is 60 meter, so 60 1080 by 60, that will be 18. So 18 groups of white lights and with spacing of 60 meter center to center. So the first group will be at a 60 meter distance from the threshold, and then onwards they will be at a distance, consecutive distance of 60 meter. And at the end portion, the center line runway flush white lighting system. So again, these are the white lightings which are indicating the center portion on the other end, and they are also of flush type, that is of the same level as the pavement itself. And lastly, the spacing in the transverse direction has also been shown, that is 2.7 meter is the total distance between the end lightings in a group, and between the groups, which are the parallel groups of lights, the spacing is 18 meters. Next are the taxiway lighting. So which are the considerations while designing the taxiway lighting? The taxiway should be clearly identified so as not to be confused with the runway. So it should be differentiated with the runway. Spacing is reduced on the curves and the intersection, as we have even seen in the case of the markings, that in the curvature the spacing is nearly kept up to half. So even in the lighting system, on the curvature or on the intersection of taxiway with the runway, the spacing is reduced. Side leaves are blue colored, that is, as we can see here, the taxiway edge lights are of blue color, and the center line are of green color. So the center line lighting are of green color and the edges are of the blue colored light. This is the view for the taxiway lighting layout. The runway edge lights, which are of the white ray emitting lights. Then the edge lighting of taxiway are of blue ray emitting light, and the center line is the green light, as we have seen. The spacing, that is uniform spacing, should not exceed 60 meter in case of the edge lighting. The taxiway and runway has been shown. Again, the edge lighting for the runway have been shown. Now there is an entrance and exit sign which is placed at the transverse distance of 0.9 meter from the pavement edge. And lastly, the transverse distance between the taxiway edge and the edge lighting is shown as 3 meter. Next are the apron and hanger lighting and the stopway lighting. We already know the purpose of apron and hanger. Apron we have revised again, and the hanger, the function is specifically where the terminal area where the repair and maintenance work of the aircraft can be carried out. Here the flood lights are provided, as we can see in this image, which are of high intensity have been provided. Mounted light source should not cause glare in the eyes of the pilot. So the flood lights should not be such that whenever the pilot is moving towards the apron or hanger, due to the flood lights, there is glare or there is obstruction, momentarily obstruction or reduction in the vision of the pilot. And lastly are the stopway lighting, which are provided to indicate the extent of stopway area available. Stopway we already have studied in the runway design. So basically indicating how much amount of area is available, red in color. So as we can see, these are the red lightings, and they give an idea regarding what is the area or extent of the stopway, which will basically come into picture when there is any emergency case during the operation of the aircraft. So that's it for this session. That's it for this chapter of ATC and visual aids.